It's really hard to believe it's week 6. I can't believe it. Time flies. So welcome to week 6. You've made it. We're almost at our halfway point. This is midterm week, right? Once we finish this week, we're halfway done. So welcome. Couple things before we do the quiz. We're going to do quiz 4 today at the beginning of class. Hopefully everybody had time to review the readings, look at the concept recording, have a look at the module readings for occupational environmental health. I sent in my announcement, hopefully you read the entire announcement. You'll notice that the homework grades are now turned on. Okay, the homework grades will be on for all of this week and all of next week. And the purpose of turning on the homework grades for 2 weeks is so that you can see how your homework is affecting your overall grade. If you're handing in your homework and doing a good job submitting it, it should bump your score up. If you're not, it's going to drag your score down. So those will stay on for 2 weeks, this week and next week, because week 8 is drop week. And it will give students the opportunity to assess if they need to make any decisions. So today we'll do quiz 4, and then we'll do content review for the concepts. We're covering occupational and environmental health this week, barriers to learning, reinforcing health education. And then we'll go through the quiz, do some teaching from that, go through the concepts, and then at the end, we'll do a case study on health education that I think will help reinforce the learning from today. And you guys have received the case study in your announcement, and we'll go through that case study. We'll break out into 3 breakout rooms, the same as week 3. Room 1 will answer question 1, room 2, question 2, room 3, question 3. So, does anybody have any questions as we're approaching midterm week? Now, at the end of this week, if anybody is below a 78 KGA, I'll be sending you what's called a mid-module assessment that just summarizes the term, your attendance, quiz grades, exam grades, and any missing assignments. And then in that assessment, it asks you to schedule a time to meet with me to talk about a plan for the second half of the term. So if you do receive a mid-module assessment in the next week, please respond to that by setting up a time with me. Okay? Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, for the week 7 project, should we submit like our separate parts one by one?
No. You have to, somebody has to take the lead on putting everybody's parts together, and it should be in a proper Word document paper in APA format.
Okay.
Don't submit your individual, it has to be put together. That's a good question, Kendra. Thank you for the question. And then everybody submits the final paper. So I realize I'll be getting multiple copies of each of
Oh,
the
okay. That's what I was thinking. Like, will we just
Yeah.
be kind of just send it? Okay.
Nope, everybody has to submit a copy because that's how it gets highlighted in the grade book. Okay, when you submit your own copy. So I do realize there'll be several of the same assignments.
Okay.
Okay, does that help? Good question. Good
Mhm.
question. Thank you. Any other questions? Now, if you've tried to access the quiz prior to 5 minutes ago, you're going to have, prior to 3 o'clock, you're going to have to refresh. Okay, because it doesn't open. I don't have it open till 3 o'clock. I'm going to, the access code is still the same. My last name, I'm putting that in the chat. So let's see, it's 3:05 now. We'll take 15 minutes, accommodations, an extra 7 minutes. So we will be coming back at 3:25. Okay, so don't go off camera while you're taking the quiz. Once you've submitted it, you can go off camera, but you got to be back no later than 3:25, and then we'll continue on with class, okay? So I'm going to make sure everybody's muted. I'm going to mute myself. If you have any questions as you're going in the next 20 minutes, just put them in the chat, please, okay? Everybody needs to stay on mute and stay on camera. All righty? It looks like everybody's finished. So if you would like to start coming back on camera, that'd be great. Claudia, Sharice, Janet, you there? Thanks.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good. Okay. How'd you do? Environmental and occupational health are really important aspects of public health and community nursing. Let's go through the quiz and we'll see where we're at, and then we'll go on and talk about each of these concepts in more detail. Let me share my screen. Okay. Can you all see my screen? Okay. First couple of questions are a review on vulnerable populations. Okay. Which are the correct answers here? Which is true? Which is not true about vulnerable populations?
C.
C,
C, and why is that?
because they have a higher mortality rate, more than
Higher
the second
mortality
highest.
rate. They're much more at risk. Are you guys enjoying the rationales? Do those help? Hopefully, as you're studying for your exams, you go back and have a look at these rationales from the quizzes. You should use those as part of your review. Okay, so let's have a look at an overview of vulnerable populations again. Right, we know that the vulnerable populations often, and we've addressed who are vulnerable populations, right? We have a good idea of who our vulnerable populations are in our communities, all of our communities, right? They often have poor health outcomes compared to other people in terms of morbidity and mortality, right? Vulnerable populations have a high prevalence of chronic illnesses, such as hypertension, high levels of communicable diseases, including TB, hepatitis, STDs, upper respiratory tract infections, including influenza, right? They also have higher mortality rates than the general population because of factors such as poor living conditions, poor diet, maybe health status based on comorbidities or access to health care, maybe living in communities that have an increased rates of crime and violence, and especially domestic violence. All right, so they definitely have higher mortality rates than the general population, right? We talked about this last week when we were talking about our LGBT community. All right, so which of the following should be the initial consideration by a nurse who is working with the vulnerable population? What's first and foremost?
B,
You remember this conversation from last week? Yes, we talked about it specifically to the LGBTQ, but we then opened that up into the general vulnerable populations. We included pregnant adolescents, We included the homelessness and the LGBT. Okay. And we talked about how important it is to have a good understanding of your own personal feelings, right? Identifying any barriers you may have, any prejudices or judgments you may have with vulnerable populations. It's going to be hard to practice culturally competent nursing with these populations if you haven't assessed your own feelings. Okay, so rationale, the foundation for a good nurse-client relationship must begin with the nurse's thorough understanding and self-awareness of their own beliefs, their own biases, their own feelings and values. It's got to be first and foremost. What's the important word in this question?
Initial.
Initial. So this is a priority-based question, right? It's not that working with the LGBT community that you don't need to understand same-sex marriage laws within each state. You do. You also eventually will be doing an assessment of the family structure within a homeless family, right? You'd also be doing assessment of gender identity and sexual orientation in a safe environment. But it's asking, what's the first thing we need to do? First, right? Brittany shaking her head. Yep. Right? You have to do a self-check. Right? Okay, so Nurse Sarah discusses discharge with the new nurses during orientation. Which statement by one of the nurses will Sarah need to correct? So first and foremost, what kind of question is this?
A negative.
Yes. Is it positively framed or negatively framed?
Yep, negatively.
It's negatively framed. So you're looking for something that Sarah says that is either incorrect, needs more clarification. Sarah may need more education or some reteaching. So you're looking for something that Sarah said that's not correct. And as I've been doing reviews, exam 1 reviews with students, I was surprised to see how many of these kinds of questions were missed. So I really want to point that out. You have to be able to identify positive framed, negative framed. Okay. All right. So what's the correct answer here?
D.
C is the correct answer. C is a correct answer, meaning discharge always begins on admission. We're looking for which statement by Sarah needs to be corrected. So
It's
if
D.
D, the last
D, right? So
Yes.
this is discharge. Sarah's saying discharge begins once the social worker receives the instructions to set up home health. That's
Which is
wrong.
just not true.
Right. We need to correct Sarah by saying, Sarah, actually, discharge planning begins upon admission. All right. So be careful of these questions. Okay. Let's look at the rationale here. Discharge planning requires looking ahead to meet the needs of patients' ongoing needs at home. It's the process that begins at the time of admission. During that assessment, as we start to plan for discharge, it includes assessing for any special needs, learning to identify appropriate education moments, providing learning opportunities that are brief and focused on preparing the patient for self-care. That's what discharge planning is all about. Can't be doing it when you're showing them the discharge paperwork, right? I mean, what if all these other services need to be involved? What if we need PT? What if we need OT? What if we need health aides? What if we need medical equipment? Okay, you can't be doing that at discharge. Starts at admission. Okay, so this is a question about education. This week we really address learning, barriers to learning, reinforcing health education, which is a big part of our job in community health education. So you're working with a client that's newly diagnosed with diabetes. This client's going to need insulin injections. Patient is unsure of how to administer the injections. Which reply by the nurse will gain more information.
Ask them about their feelings and how they feel about having diabetes and putting and injecting themselves with insulin so you can see where they're at.
Right, that's that assessment. All right, where are they at? Where are they at? How ready are they to learn? It's very similar to nurses checking what we just talked about, checking in with our own feelings when caring for vulnerable populations, checking our own feelings. How are we feeling about caring for that a particular vulnerable population? Same goes with the client, right? It's best to assess at the beginning, how are they feeling? Maybe they're totally flipped out and aren't going to be able to hear what you say until you do a few things prior to that. It's important to know how they're feeling. Right? You'll get a good feel for what kind of education plan you're going to need to develop. Right? So would you share how you feel about having diabetes and going to administer insulin? Important. So that's what the rationale says. Assessing the patient's readiness to learn is an important part of developing a plan for teaching. Encouraging them to talk about their feelings, concerns, anxiety, and goals helps the nurse develop that plan, right? Motivation plays a large role in effective learning. The desire to return to independence or return to the comfort of their home is often a motivating factor. If you have a client that is motivated, okay? Work with patients to show them advantages of learning what they need to know. Patient education sessions will be more successful if the patient is comfortable and rested and there is a minimum of interruptions. Okay, so that rationale is an excellent summary of why we need to assess the patient's readiness to learn. How motivated are they? There's a lot of people that aren't motivated. And if they're not motivated, how do we motivate them? You know, I think of a lot of clients with chronic illnesses, right? They're so overwhelmed with their illnesses that their motivation sometimes is less desirable because they have so much going on. One of the things that we need to figure out as educators is how do we motivate? And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Okay, Sam is being seen in the clinic today. He's a high school graduate. There are several pages of discharge instructions. The nurse can assess his ability to read and comprehend written instructions by doing what? Which of the following? It's the right answer.
B.
B.
B. Okay, let's look at these other answers. Graduating from high school does not guarantee reading comprehension. Okay, so A is actually incorrect. It doesn't guarantee. All right. C, asking Sam, when did you graduate from high school? We don't care. It has nothing to do with it. And then why is D wrong?
Because he could lie and say yes.
Exactly. That's a good
It's
answer. What
rude.
else?
And it's a close-ended question. It's a yes or no. It doesn't
Exactly.
mhm.
Exactly. And it may be somewhat insulting as well. You know, what if they can't? What if they can't read? Okay, and they're too embarrassed to say something. Okay, Let's look at this is a good rationale too. This came right from your book. Okay. Evaluating the effectiveness of patient education is critical to success. Okay. How do you know you've been effective? All right. This, pardon me, this involves giving and obtaining feedback, okay, from the patient regarding what was taught, then using the feedback to determine whether effective learning has in fact taken place, right? So a return demonstration of a skill, that's that teach back, right, is one way of evaluating the patient's learning. You can point out that this is an example would be teaching that diabetic patient how to give themselves insulin. All right. Pointing out what steps were done correctly, make suggestions about what are the needed corrections. Right. When a patient is learning information rather than a skill, ask questions to obtain feedback about retention and comprehension of the material taught. Allow the patient to take time to think through the answers. Let the patient use any printed material for handouts. All right. This will show you that the patient can appropriately use resources you provided. Right. And obviously, the more positive feedback and encouragement we can give the patients. Okay. But you have to be able to assess comprehension. I mean, you could be going through a whole list of discharge instructions. If they're not comprehending anything, it's a moot point. Right? Here's a follow-up question to that. Lisa knows that low literacy is a learning-related barrier. Which of the following statements by the client indicates that the client is experiencing a learner-related barrier? Select all that apply. Okay. What are the two right answers here?
B and C.
Okay, why is B and C correct?
Professor, I also checked D. So if you can, when you go over why D is wrong, I can wait for that.
Okay, why is B and C correct?
Because they're going around reading. They're like trying to get away from the reading, trying to
Yeah,
avoid it.
and how do you know that they can read? Maybe this is the right, Janet. This is the way, this is their excuse for really not saying I can't read. Right? So that's a red flag statement. I will figure it out. Just tell me what is important. That's another red flag. We don't want you to figure it out. Right? We want you to be able to read and comprehend what's being given to you. D, it can't be that hard to learn. I only have to take pills, right? Why do you think that's right? Why did you think that was right, Janet?
Because I feel like at that point they could have read it and they could have said something like, well, I'll read it or whatever, or they could have read it right then. But saying that it can't be that hard and asking the question, is this all I have to do, when the instructions are right there, I thought that was a learning barrier. I got that part wrong.
Well, I mean, the first part, it can't be that hard to learn. But when they say I only have to take my pills, that means they know what to do. Right? They know what to do. They know they have to take their pills.
Yeah, but then sometimes you may have to, in addition to taking the pills, you may have to avoid sunlight. You may have to.
You're reading too much into the question.
Okay.
Doesn't say anything about sunlight in the question, Janet.
Okay.
Right? So the first part would be concerning, but then they say the second part, which means they know what to do. Right? Where B and C, they're not admitting to know anything. Just telling you what to do. Right?
Yes, ma'am.
So let's look at the rationale here. Before beginning to teach, you need to assess for factors that might interfere with the patient's ability to learn. Low literacy is very common. And I don't say that condescendingly. Okay. There are a lot of clients that have low literacy about their condition, their diagnosis, the plan, the treatment. Okay. Conditions that can affect the learning process. It could be somebody have vision issues. They're hearing impaired. They have impaired motor function. They can't read, illiterate. Maybe they can't comprehend, impaired cognition. Often patients express a lack of self-confidence, saying, I'll never be able to do that. I would hear that all the time in the schools when I was working with kids that were newly diagnosed diabetics, or working with the older kids that carried EpiPens and trying to teach them how to give their own EpiPen. I heard that all the time. I can't do it. I'm scared. Right? So with the lack of confidence, right, you need to take it a step further and explore their feelings, right? Being careful to enhance rather than harm the patient's self-esteem. Yes, you can. Yes, you can do it. We're going to go through this as many times as you need to. We're going to practice giving injections into a doll or a pillow or something until you're comfortable doing it. Right? Obviously, praise and encouragement goes a long, long way versus negativity. Okay? Okay, this gets into occupational health. The nurse may conduct an assessment of the workplace, which is what occupational health is, right? Working in a work setting. So the nurse may conduct an assessment of the workplace, which is known as a work site walkthrough or a work site assessment or a work site survey. Direct observation allows the nurse to learn which of the following.
All four of them.
I say A and C.
I said
Okay.
all four.
Anybody else?
I chose all four.
All
Mhm.
four.
If you read about in your readings from occupational health, all four. Okay, and we'll talk about this more in detail, but the occupational nurse, she needs to have an understanding of what the work processes and the materials are in the workplace. She needs to understand the job descriptions, the requirements of various jobs to make sure people are trained adequately to perform their duties safely. She also needs to be aware of the potential hazards. Those are, those MSDS sheets you have in all your facilities. Chemical hazards, right? What if it's a large plant that's real noisy, right? Hearing or loud noise may be a potential hazard. We always think of maybe unsafe use of equipment. Heat, working in a environment that's very hot or very cold. And she also definitely has to have an understanding of the work practices. If somebody ends up with a back injury, how are they practicing lifting? Did they know the proper technique? Do they need to be re-educated? So all four of these are part of the occupational nurse's job, right? And that's what the rationale says. The nurse may conduct an assessment of the workplace to learn about processes and the material requirements of the job, presence of actual potential hazards, work practices of employees, and to observe effectiveness of safety education and equipment. So Charisse, I think you said you only selected 2. Do you understand why all 4? Yeah,
Yeah, I do.
okay. Question 8. Mary, the nurse, knows that there is no safe occupation or profession. One of the regular scheduled primary interventions that Mary will implement Which one is primary?
Provide safety education.
Education, provide safety education as to prevent something from happening. In the rationale, I just gave you examples of all three interventions with regards to occupational health. I took this right from your book. What is B?
Tertiary
What's C?
screening, secondary.
Okay. What's D?
Tertiary.
Mhm. Does everybody understand why those are either primary, secondary, or tertiary?
Yes,
Here's
ma'am.
some examples. Primary, teaching coping mechanisms, provide healthy diet education and safety education. This is focused on occupational health in the workplace. Educating on the use of ergonomic lifting, how to properly lift, how to use protective equipment, all trying to prevent things from happening, injuries, accidents. Secondary, screening for hearing loss in that really noisy plant. Blood pressure screenings as a benefit, right? Kind of health fairs within the organization. Screenings for stress and burnout. Then tertiary, something has to be present, right? So maybe the occupational nurse is looking at some kind of a limited duty program for workers that can return to work, not quite at full duty, but maybe limited duty. Okay, so there's been an illness or an injury. Okay, providing illness or injury specific education, such as using a wrist splint, say for somebody who had carpal tunnel surgery or a carpal tunnel diagnosis. Maybe somebody who had back pain or back issues, had a back injury, helping them, making sure they know how to use their brace properly. Okay. Which step of the ethical decision-making process is identifying ethical issues? What do you have to do first? Or excuse me, what's the right answer?
First.
First, right? In order to start processing and talking about ethical decision-making, you have to identify what an issue is, right? So the rationale says that first step in ethical decision-making is to identify the ethical issues that are faced, right? After we've identified what the issue is, then we can obtain all relevant facts, consider maybe appropriate approaches, make a decision, implement whatever action we have come up with, and then evaluate it. That's just going through the nursing process, right? But first you have to identify an issue. Number 10, the home health nurse works in a community with high rates of complex chronic illnesses and neurological disorders. Okay, so which environmental characteristic is a priority? What do we learn about environmental risks? What's the right answer here, Brittany?
I chose B.
Yep. Okay, and it's asking which is a priority. Okay, well, presence of several manufacturing plants near a community's river is indeed very high risk, right? Very high risk for contamination. Okay, and this is the point I always mention. Has anybody ever watched that Erin Brockovich movie? It's all about water contamination, environmental risks for a small community. Gets very sick. Okay. And that's what the rationale states. Assessing a patient for environmental health risks requires several questions. And there's a nice box in your book in chapter, no, it's in our campus reading. I'll show you that. Well, you have to find out where they live. Where do you live? Where do you work? Where do you go to school? Where do your kids go to school? What's your diet? Right? Are you exposed to pesticides? Right? That's a good starting point for doing a environmental risk assessment. Right? Are there factories in your community? Are there dump sites, waste sites, major transportation hubs? Right? All those, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about environmental health, but think about the community you live in. Let me jump to our where do I want to get to? I want to get to a module. This is an excellent summary in your module this week. We tend to talk about occupational and environmental health together, but there's a lot of similarities, but there's obviously some stark differences. Okay. So I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I want to point out a few things before we go to the PowerPoint. Occupational environmental health nursing is a specialty practice, okay, that provides for and delivers health and safety programs and service to workers, worker populations, and community groups. Okay, this type of practice focuses on the promotion and restoration of health, prevention of illness and injuries, and protection from work-related and environmental hazards. Okay. Obviously, a safe working environment is the goal. The occupational nurse role has really become a very critical part of the healthcare team for organizations. Right? Obviously, the goal is to keep people healthy and at work. Right? To keep people healthy and at work, they have to be properly trained and educated. Right? When you start having workplace injuries, one after the other, things need to be evaluated. Okay? Poor employee health costs. They cost businesses an estimated $1 trillion a year. That's a lot. And so this is why our executives look to occupational environmental health nurses to maximize employee productivity and reduce costs through lower disability claims. Right? This is what workers' comp is all about. Right? So some of the roles occupational environmental nurses play. They can be educators, case managers. Okay, their responsibilities have expanded greatly, right? Case management. We'll talk about that in a few weeks, but a case manager is basically a coordinator of care. And all the big insurance companies and all the big organizations, you have case management departments. Case managers take on these roles of employees who have been sick or injured, right? Think about all the things a case manager would need to be involved in if a worker got hurt, right? Working with HR on appropriate paperwork, working with the employee, working with the doctors. Can they come back to work early? How long are they going to be out for? When they come back to work, what can they do? What are their restrictions? Okay. A lot of responsibility. Also, when we talk about occupational health, it's not all about injury and safe environment, injury, illness, or injury free. Think about the mental health crisis we have going on. in our country. People bring things to work, right? Look at the significant increase in workplace violence over the last decade. So a occupational health nurse may be involved in counseling and crisis intervention. Right? A lot of the big corporations and organizations have, well, at least my organization, they call it different things at different places, but we had what we called an EAP, right? Employee Assistance Program. That was provided to employees for counseling, crisis management for the employee and their families, for whatever they may be going through. Okay. There's a lot of employees that currently work in the workforce that have substance abuse issues, right? Have alcohol related issues, have psychosocial needs, wellness, health promotion concerns, or other work related concerns, right? So this is where the occupational nurse either provides the counseling and crisis intervention resources, or she refers them out to, say, an EAP. Another role of the occupational nurse is health promotion and risk reduction. In our school district, it's a really large district. We had like 85,000 students, but we had such a big workforce that we had a whole department that was healthy. I forget what it was called. It was like health and wellness, where they did seminars and teachings and Zoom calls and everything, right? Supporting, providing the employees information and education and resources to how to support positive lifestyles, right? Trying to help provide information on how to lower your risks for disease and injury, right? Lot of webinars, seminars on work-life balance, right? Smoking cessation programs, exercise and fitness. We even had a discounted membership to a local gym that was full. People used it all the time, right? So that's part of health promotion, risk reduction. Another role is legal and regulatory compliance. All right, there's a set of rules. There's a set of environmental guidelines and laws that employers have to follow. Whether you work in a bank, a fast food restaurant, a hospital, a long-term care facility, there's occupational and environmental laws, guidelines, rules that have to be followed. I'm sure everybody's heard of OSHA. OSHA comes into the mix when we talk about occupational health. Okay, OSHA stands for Occupational Safety and Health Administration, right? They are the enforcers. Now, something goes down in your workplace that's related to environmental issues, whether it's patient falls, whether it's maybe a death in the OR that was unexpected, readmissions that are above normal, OSHA will come in and look at your compliance, right? The other thing with people taking leave, they also, one of the regulatory compliance requirements is that employers follow the FMLA, Family Medical Leave, right? And then HIPAA. HIPAA is also part of legal and regulatory compliance. Okay, and then worker and workplace hazard detection. Okay, worker and workplace hazard detection. So occupational health nurses have to be educated and aware of any potential hazards, monitor them, evaluate them, know what employees' job descriptions are, what's expected of them. You know, if you work, let's say in a facility that has a transport department? When these people start their employment, are they taught appropriately how to transfer, lift, prevent falls? If you are in the OR working as a tech, working with all these chemicals, do you know how to safely handle these chemicals or medications or solutions? Do employees know how to use personal protective equipment? Okay. So that's just a kind of an overview. Let's have a look at let's see what we missed here. So those are our concepts. So occupational health, continuing with that. We talked about the nurse needing to do workplace assessments, right? Learn what the business, the facility is all about. Is it a hospital where we're delivering patient care? Is it a fast food restaurant where cooking, high temperatures, ovens may be an issue? Is it a nail salon using certain supplies that have to know about, right? What are people's job requirements, and are they prepared to carry out their job requirements? Whenever we start a new job, don't you always have to get with occupational health? Always, right? Knowing the potential hazards of the job, workplace practices. He or she should also be observing effectiveness of safety education and equipment. Nurses will also see various injuries, diseases acquired from employment. Every single industry has serious hazards related to work, and really no work is completely risk-free. It really isn't. Okay, we talked about the roles in our module reading: clinical educators, case managers. Typically, occupational nurses report to upper management and consultants. And there are occupational nurses that also work in big healthcare insurance companies to monitor all of this. Counsel and crisis intervention, health promotion risk, we talked about that, legal and regulatory, worker and workplace hazard detection. All right, so let me double check. I'm going to put you guys on mute for 1 second. 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. Just looking at to make sure I covered everything with occupational health. Talked about that. Okay, great. Okay, let's go to, this was in one of your rationales. Okay, let's talk about environmental health. Oh, come on. It's under there. Okay. Okay, let's think about the community you live in. All right. Just think about your zip code. Think about driving around your community doing a windshield survey. If anybody doesn't know what a windshield survey is, it's exactly what it says it is. You're driving around, looking around. Okay, you're the community nurse. Okay, and you're new to the community and you're doing an environmental assessment. What are you going to be looking for? What'd you learn in your readings? What are you going to be looking for in your environment to assess the health of the environment?
Are we gonna be looking at, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, are we gonna be looking at, how many plants are in the area?
Maybe
Um,
you live in an industrial area, sure. What else?
The water, the
Water.
soil,
Yeah,
pollution.
yeah. Do you live near rivers or streams or water of some kind? Do you live near a major transportation hub where air pollution might be an issue? I live near a huge highway that comes coast to coast. It's I-70, goes through Denver. I live half a mile. I can hear brakes because I live right when you're coming out of the big mountains. I hear brakes all the time, squeaking. I smell brakes. The noise, the pollution of all these massive trucks going through Colorado. And it makes a difference. All right, what if you live near a nuclear waste site? What if you live near a transportation hub like railways with a potential for railway accidents? What if you live in a community that has lots of older housing? What if you live in a community that has very high crime rates, gang rates, violence rates? What if you live in a community that a lot of the population lives in poverty? A lot of the population lives in close housing quarters. What if you're in the rural population and you're working in agriculture and you're exposed to pesticides being sprayed in the air or being used in the place of employment? What if, just think about your own place where you live. Think about all the chemicals you have. Cleaning supplies, I don't know, gardening supplies, fertilizer, whatever. Think about all the environmental risks that are around us, right? Think about when you go to a fast food, you just make the assumption. So three of the biggest environmental risks are air, soil, water, and food. Okay? Food. When I go to a restaurant or go through a drive-through, I just make the assumption that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? They're preparing the food correctly. They're serving it correctly. They're cooking it correctly. They're washing their hands correctly. You don't know what's going on. And that's when all your foodborne illness issues come out, right? We just don't think about it. I'll speak for myself, take a lot for granted in my own community. Somebody's looking at the air pollution, making sure it's okay. Somebody, when there's a new development going up and you see them digging or unearthing ground for new development. Well, I make the assumption with the 200 houses going in there that somebody's tested the soil, that we're not building on something that's going to potentially be a problem, right? I already gave my food example. I make the assumption everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. But I learned the hard way when one of my kids was younger and we ate chicken. He had chicken tenders at a restaurant. He was like 5 years old, got salmonella. And was in the hospital for, almost a month. When he was 5 years old, got salmonella. So we make those assumptions, right? We make assumptions that everything we store in our own private residences or wherever we live is stored properly. Is it? The schools, all the kids running around the schools, think about in daycare centers, think about supplies, pesticides, herbicides. There's a lot of environmental risks that we just live within that we don't think twice about, right? So a couple of stats here. Environmental hazards are responsible for 1/2 of the total burden of diseases. I'm not surprised. Environmental hazards contribute to over 80% of communicable and non-communicable diseases and injuries. I'm not surprised at that either. We know that kids are much more vulnerable to environmental hazards. Think of kids in buildings, in old schools, in old daycare centers, in old homes with paint chipping, right? They put everything in their mouths, right? The increase for lead exposure goes through the roof. When we think of environmental risks or environmental health, genetics can be involved, socioeconomic status can be involved, environmental exposures can be involved. I want to read something more specific to that bullet. Okay, because we would ask, why would socioeconomic status influence environmental health? Okay, well, here's your answer. Those who live in poverty are much more likely to be exposed to environmental hazards due to some of the things I already talked about. Overcrowded living conditions, living closer to hazardous waste sites, maybe having poorer quality of foods available to them. They live in a community that doesn't have big grocery stores, right? Maybe having more hazardous jobs. Think about that rural community and those high risk jobs in farming, mining, right? Living in older homes we talked about with lead-based paint. Genetic predispositions. Maybe there's a family history of a communicable and non-communicable disease. That's how genetics plays in. And we see more and more environmental hazards contributing to kids' development. Maybe are higher rates of autism in certain areas, right? Developmental delays. You know, if you live in a community that has horrible air, air pollution, do you have a subsequent increase in kids diagnosed with asthma? It's all connected, right? We don't think about it as we should. But if you're out there working in the community or working in public health, you will be doing environmental risk assessments. I was always doing environmental risk assessments at the beginning of every school year in all my different buildings. That's our job. Okay. How do you do an environmental risk assessment? What do you assess people for? Similar to occupational nursing. Where do you live? What do you eat? What's your housing situation? Do you live in older buildings? Are you exposed to pesticides? Is your drinking water safe? Is your air quality appropriate? Do you know that, where are my two statistics? It is estimated that, and this came from your book, 30 million Americans drink water that does not meet the EPA standards. Okay. 50% of Americans, half, live in areas where the air quality does not meet the national standard. That's a lot. And you talk about chronic diseases and upper respiratory issues and pulmonary issues and asthma, allergies, right? Environmental health in children. Couple of facts. We know the kids are more sensitive. The increase in environmental risk increases the risk of childhood cancers. Kids have underdeveloped livers. Sometimes kids are immunocompromised. Their immune system is not fully developed yet. Right? And then we talked a little bit about food contaminants and food handling. Right? So if we're working with a patient with a client in their home and doing an environmental, we talked a lot about doing environmental assessment in the communities, but think about your client. When you're going into the home to do a home visit, you're doing an environmental assessment of their home, right? Is the refrigerator working? Can they keep their meds chilled if they need to be? Are there rugs that they're going to slip and fall on? Do they have railings to pull themselves up if they need to? Right? All right, let's talk about learning, barriers to learning. So, okay. We know that patient education is one of the most important roles we do as a nurse, right? When we do our education, we are promoting health. I'm reading from my notes now, so you can take notes if you want, because it's just expanding what's the bullet points on here, right? We use our education to promote health, prevent illness and injury, improve health-related behaviors. We teach to enable patients and their families to care for their own health conditions, right? We know that when patients take personal responsibility for their health, they're much more effective in making the changes necessary to care for themselves, right? And we should know this as nurses, education empowers, right? It empowers our clients with knowledge and hopefully motivation that helps them take personal responsibility, right? One of the biggest barriers we face in learning, we talked a little bit about this, is low literacy. I'm not saying that in a condescending way. I think I already said that. All right, one of the most important barriers is literacy. We often deal with individuals and populations who are illiterate or have very low literacy skills. Just think about language barriers. Think about wherever we work right now, or our kids in our schools, or our community as a whole. Look at all the cultures that are intertwining with each other. There's a lot of populations within your own communities, every community, that don't speak the language or speak the English language to be able to understand what they've been diagnosed with, when they need to go to urgent care, what the discharge instructions are. All right, we started to talk about this in one of the quiz questions. These individuals with low literacy may be too embarrassed to admit their reading deficit to a healthcare worker. They may appear to understand, but they really don't. That's that head nod, right? Do you understand what I'm saying? Do they? I don't know. This is, okay, one of the ways that nurses can assess the client's ability to read and comprehend is by having the client, this goes to the quiz question, client read a printed instruction sheet and acknowledging what they've read. Do you understand how to change a dressing? Here's a pamphlet on how to do it. You read it and then let me reinforce what you need to do. Okay? We talked about assessing the readiness to learn with motivation. We talked about lack of self-confidence. Okay. Readiness to learn, but here's our barriers. Readiness to learn, motivation, cultures and values, personal expectations and experiences, lack of self-confidence, and we want to be supporting and praising. I don't know why it keeps going the other way. Okay, I just want to focus on this. So we all have different ways we learn, right? There's 3 different domains. Those domains are at the bottom here. Let's talk about each of them. We all possess the ability to cognitively learn, to affectively learn, and to learn psychomotor, the psychomotor way. Cognitive is the thinking, okay? We all possess all 3, but typically one of them are more prominent. Like for me, I'm a psychomotor learner. I like hands-on. I need to see what's going on and practice it myself, okay? I do possess cognitive and affective, but I'm much more not prevalent, but much more interested in psychomotor learning. So cognitive is the thinking part. All right. So cognitive is the ability to hear information, read information, understand it, memorize it, put it into practice. All right. To solve problems. That's the thinking. Okay. Affective is the feeling part of it. Okay. Let's say you're doing a teaching activity. What of your audience that you're teaching, what are their attitudes, their feelings, their beliefs, and their values? This will affect their ability to learn. Have you ever sat in an in-service of something that either you don't believe in or you disagree with? Do you pay less attention? It's a mandatory in-service. You got to go. Right? Your attitudes, whatever, feelings, beliefs may impede your effectiveness to learn. That's the feeling part of it. Do my values and feelings get in the way of effective learning? And then psychomotor, like I said, is the doing. Learning a skill or task through practice and experience. This is that example of teaching the kid how to give his own insulin. Or teaching them how, somebody who just went from an insulin shot to a pump. Showing them, teaching them, practicing with their pump. Okay. What are you going to do when you're doing in services or doing teaching and you have visually impaired learners? What are you going to do if you have auditorily impaired learners? What are you going to do if people don't have the motor function to perform the skill? Okay, teaching is a lot of what we do. We have to be prepared. Well, you may have a group of people or a family. Let's say you're working on comprehensive discharge instructions with somebody who's just had a stroke, right? And they bring in their family being part of the discharge planning. Well, some of them may be cognitive learners, affective learners, psychomotor learners. No, show me what to do. Show me exactly what to do, you know? So you have to be able to decipher who you read the room. Who's your audience? You're not going to have an audience that everybody learns in the same way. Just like you're not going to have a family when you're working with a family of them learning all the same way. So in summary, if education doesn't address all three of these domains, you're not going to be as nearly as effective as you need to be, right? I mean, I can say this next one for my kids. Telling somebody to change without motivating them to do so or providing them with the skills, it's not effective. Can't just say, do it. Do it. Can't. Collaboration, so reinforcing health education. It has to be a collaborative effort, okay? If you're discharging that patient that's had a stroke, all right? Collaboration with PT, with OT, with home health, with speech, with transportation maybe, with a home health aide, okay? Everybody needs to be brought to the table and it needs to be a collaborative team effort with health education. Okay, the plan should be agreed and discussed and agreed upon by the client. Right? You have to be able to assess for knowledge deficits. How do you make up for those? Right? Goal, primary goal of education, illness prevention, wellness promotion, and if they have something, health restoration. Right? And here's some examples. I'm going to let you read slide 15 on your own. Okay, a couple of last comments about learning and barriers to learning. Learning has not occurred until the behavior has changed. You can talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, right? But there has to be behavior change. Does anybody work with somebody who constantly says, oh, we'll just keep doing it the old way, it works? I've been doing it this way for 30 years. Right? Behavioral changes are hard. Okay? As humans, we tend to go the path of least resistance, do we not? We do. Well, let me make sure yep, I covered everything. Okay, questions about anything that we went over? All right, I'm gonna put you guys into 3 breakout rooms. Somebody needs to pull up the case study that was in your week 6 announcement. This is a case study about health education. Hopefully it's gonna reinforce what we just talked about. So I'm gonna put you guys into a breakout room. We'll spend 5 minutes in there. Answer your question. Room 1 is question 1, room 2 is question 2, room 3 is question 3, and then we'll come back and talk about it in maybe 5-7 minutes, and then maybe 5 minutes, and then I want to have you guys out of here by 40 after the hour, since we had to take a break, okay? So I'm going to open up these rooms. See you in about 5 minutes. Claudia, you there? Did you have enough time?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Okay, let's go through this. This is the instructor version of the case study, and I'll send you this when I send you the recording because it has the correct answer and the rationale. And I'm a big believer in rationales for teaching. So, group one, right? So the school nurse provides education to students, parents, faculty with the intent of providing individuals and groups with tools to make informed decisions about their healthcare needs. Health education in the school is aimed at promoting healthy habits, lifestyles, preventing illness, teaching measures to identify problems at an early stage. An important factor in this process is for the nurse to set an example in terms of weight management, physical activity, and lifestyle choices. Okay, so group one, room one, did you come up with the answer C?
Yes, we did.
Yes.
How? How did you, what were you thinking? How did you come up with C? So you have Robert Miller, who's a school nurse working in the elementary setting. One of the first steps in creating an effective educational program for his students is, what do we have to do first?
We have to identify the learning needs of the population. Like, how do they
Right.
learn?
How
Because
do
they're
they learn?
children.
How are we
How
going
are
to
they going to
develop?
learn the information?
Right. How are we going to develop a program without identifying what the needs are, right? So let's look at the rationale here. A core public health principle is asking learners to participate in identifying their learning needs, right? Then education programs are designed to meet those needs, right? Room two, what did you come up with?
My answer was C because of the teach back method for the kids, so that we know the kids learned. So
That's
within
part of
2 weeks,
it, yes.
that's what we said because of the
Yep.
teach back.
Let me add to that.
And
Let me add to that. Mr. Miller creates an educational program for the second graders at a school. His topic is related to exercise fitness. What would be an appropriate objective? So yes, Charisse, what you said is correct, but let's add to that the difference between objectives and goals. Because it's asking, the question is, what would be an appropriate objective? So here's the difference in the rationale. Objectives are specific, short-term criteria that are met as steps toward achieving long-term goals. Okay, so within 2 weeks is an objective. So within 2 weeks, each of the kids will be able to demonstrate at least 2 new exercises they have learned. Right? So objectives are short-term, they're written statements of an intended outcome or expected behavior change. Right? Objectives must be stated clearly and defined in measurable terms. Okay, so they're implying an action. Right? So within 2 weeks, each kid will be able to demonstrate at least 2 exercises. That's action oriented. So yeah, you guys are correct. Room 3, what did you come up with?
We got lack of credibility
Right. Why?
because he is setting a bad example. He's not following what he should be. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
So this rationale is a teacher related barrier, an educator related barrier, not your audience, but the actual educator. So lack of credibility with respect to a certain topic is a common educator related barrier, right? So the nurse can increase confidence by carefully preparing for the talk so that the useful information is included and the nurse understands the information. Right? You should never apologize. Oh, I'm not really educated in this area. I was just a fill-in because somebody called out sick. That's not what we want to tell our audience, right? We should be trying to convey an attitude as an expert, maybe briefly sharing professional, personal background, right? So obviously in this setting, the nurse should try and lead by example, right? So I'll send you that case study with the rationale, just so you can have it as another resource. Okay. So we covered a lot today. So we've now covered all material for exam 2. We did weeks 4 and 5 last week and week 6 this week. Okay. This week we have reviews for exam 2. I believe they're on, you have the master schedule. I believe they're on Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. So if you can try and get to one of those, fantastic. If you can't, at least listen to the recordings. Okay. You'll get all 3 recordings. And you guys are a Monday class. So I'll do my best to get you Professor Kershaw's review recording late Sunday night. I'll do my best. I don't think I got it out till Monday morning for exam 1 because I didn't get it. I was already asleep when I got it. So, but I think I got it out the next morning. So prepare. You now have all 3 weeks of content recordings. You have PowerPoints. You have your readings. I would suggest you use your last 2 quizzes, quiz 3 and 4 rationales to prepare. Right? And then if you missed any part of lecture over the last couple of weeks, go back and review that part that you missed. Okay? And you have your study guide. It was in the week 4 announcement. And then if anybody, after you get through your reviews and preparing for your exam, you guys are a Monday group. So if anybody has any issues the end of this week or over the weekend and need to go through any concepts you still may be struggling with after your preparation, please reach out and schedule a tutoring time with me, okay? And we'll do that before exam 2. All right. Anybody have any questions? 1 minute to spare. Yay. Gift of time. All right. Well, good to see everybody. Have a great week. You know where to find me. Reach out if you need anything.
I need
And
to
good.
see you for a minute.
Okay, just stay on. Yeah, stay on. All right. Have a good week.